Get some folks on. We're going to do a quick live stream on Biden's executive order. So we're looking at the White House putting out an executive order today, and we're looking at the. I'm going to peel back. There's been a few different videos out today, and it seems everybody's using the Cliff Notes version of this executive order. I actually have the full executive order open, and we're going to just talk to a couple of the big points and what I see and how I'm consuming this information compared to the Cliff Notes version that different media agencies and outlets are looking at. So let's or just jump right into it. If you guys catch this after the live stream, you'll be able to see this whole thing in its entirety because it's going to go live right away after it. So we're going to jump right over to the executive order and take a look at what we're looking at here. So we've been all looking forward to this. I think a video before this I had out there making some speculation that it may be the formation of a new government agency or department that would spearhead these efforts. In this executive order, that was not the case. They did not announce any new, agencies, even though there was speculation that there would be. But there is quite a bit. This was a very substantive executive order. They're broken into a few different sections, and they kind of categorize them by essentially the way they're going to implement, the direction. So this very first section, policy, section 1, really lands on an overarching scope. So I look at this like if you break down this executive order, it is what are they talking about? It's the scope of it. And then it's laid out in these various categories of how they want to approach, a solution and a strategy to just digital assets in general. So this first section being the policy kind of lays out that scope. They kind of set it up with what and why, right? So they're talking in the age of digital ledger technology and financial services. Bottom line, there's been a lot of growth in this space. They got concerns from consumer protection, investors, businesses, and private data and security firms, financial stability and systemic risk related to that when it comes to crime and national security. So if you think of what's happened in the past few years, especially around digital currencies, as crypto in general has gotten popular, some of the nefarious use that comes around with that impacts, the government agencies from, a crime standpoint, from people using it for malicious intent. You think of anybody that has had any kind of, their data locked up and, frozen, and then somebody, the only way to unlock it is to pay, the folks out. And you think of like, I know in Georgia, Atlanta, the municipalities in Atlanta had some servers locked up. You think of those things. Where does the government come in and enter action from a negative standpoint in that malicious activity? They kind of highlight also in this portion of the policy side is really who the government bodies that are going to try to address some of that. And then they also pay homage a little bit to the central bank digital currencies. And finally, in writing, put out there that, hey, they're looking at this from a CBDC standpoint. So really, that's kind of the layout. They kind of give you the lay of the land and scope in Section 1. They talk to the combined total capitalization of that $3 trillion and, the growth of it, showing that $14 billion in early November of 2016 when they really started first looking at it, and now up to that $3 trillion, showing the growth of the market cap. We get into Section 2, and this is where the real meat of this is at. And I've read through this a few times today to try to really peel back and understand kind of what are they really looking at from an objective. So like if these are stated, topics, these are effectively like action statements is the way I read this. When they have them really annotated out there in an outline standpoint of the A, B, C, D standpoint. So that first one, and you'll see this on a lot of the Cliff Notes versions, is protecting consumers and investors, businesses. within the United States. And what's that mean? Well, part of that is some of the rules that are out there, some of the way businesses would have to interact to be able to leverage, crypto, mainly around like the investment community. So if you're having like a company that is coming in there and doing financial services, there's a whole bunch of rules that they have to follow, from a reporting standpoint, from accredited investors, if it's a certain amount of money, all that kind of stuff. Doesn't play on that same field right now with crypto. I mean, short of having to give up all of your personal information if you're on an American exchange, things that Coinbase and some of these other larger exchanges have asked for, right? If to have you be able to withdraw capital from there, there's no real strong framework from a reporting standpoint when it comes to crypto by the same comparison to typical investment stuff. So they kind of served this one up saying, in the absence of oversight here and standards, firms providing digital asset services may be providing inadequate protections for sensitive financial data, custodial, and other arrangements related to customer assets and funds. So what that statement means is that it's not having to do. There's a risk that if somebody has a database of your information, there's a certain level of requirements if like a bank has your information that they have to adhere to and protect that financial sensitivity of that data. There's things like information management and retention, which is IM&R, which is a way that they have to stay compliant and they're audited to. So really that kind of back end mechanical stuff, if you're providing custodial services, that they're looking at having to, try to give some guidance around, because this is a little more complex and a new emerging, space. So additionally, cybersecurity, market failures at digital asset exchanges, they're highlighting the obvious here, right? As part of their weight on this executive order of why they want to make sure that people are protected, because essentially you're YOLOing into these various exchanges. And, what kind of protections do you have? I mean, there's a couple exchanges I use that every time I log in, I wonder if it's going to be there. I've had a couple exchanges through my entire crypto experience. Cryptsy is one of them. Cryptsy kept a lot of my Litecoin, Feathercoin, the original Feathercoin I had back in the day, a handful of other tokens. Big Vern, that was who was always on Twitter talking about the Cryptsy exchange. Essentially, Big Vern left with all of our money. Right. There's been several other exchanges that have came and gone. Cryptopia was another one down in I think it was New Zealand. Right. There's been lots of exchanges that have went around. Remember, and there's always this mantra about not your keys, not your coins. But the stark reality, and I've talked about this before on the channel, is when you're talking exchanges, you're talking any kind of custodial adjustment. It's not that you need to keep it there, right? There's a lot of people that use exchanges for the exact what we're talking about. They may, if you're a proof of work miner and you're mining a currency and you want to buy into another currency or take a hedge into something, you're going to use an exchange. Now you can use a DeFi alternative on some networks, but not everything has DeFi to where you can leverage a decentralized exchange. Most of them are CeFi exchanges. CeFi listings are big things when a coin gets listed onto an exchange, right? And then you have the ability to take fiat currency and buy coin, and then you can exit it out of an exchange. Having those protections on there are important, and then having some of the standards out there that they have to adhere to just protects your money. I get some folks do not like governments toying around with, crypto. It's when you look at the core basis of what crypto is, you short of like a Bitcoin maximalist person, the realities is the interaction and the counterparties that are going to take positions, be that for a reason to use the coins that we mine or people that are developing, need to get those coins from somewhere. So they're going to be using an exchange. So again, all of this there has to be some level of framework, at least in the United States, that people are going to have to adhere to when it comes to like an exchange behavior. Now, they're not really giving you how they're going to really approach that, right? This executive order is just going in and stating the fact of, protecting that in that first thing. And that leads you right into number 2 here, or B as they have tagged here, is protecting global financial stability, mitigating systemic risk. Some digital asset platforms and services providers grows rapidly in size and complexities and may not be subject to compliance. Digital assets issuers and exchanges and traded platforms, intermediaries, and those activities increase risk of financial stability. I mean, a lot of that's just a claim, right? As it's substantiated, has the digital asset space can shake global markets right now. I would argue that a lot of that volume, if they really started peeling back of it, is a mix between probably some exchange wash trading. Just when you look at the inflows and outflows out of exchanges, at least in the early days it was. Some of that now has a lot more liquidity in it. And when you look at the exit of exchanges, for a lot of large players do hold their own keys. So, is this still a huge, massive regulatory risk there? I mean, that's questionable. I think they're just using some reference here from things that have previously happened. Where they say new and unique uses and functions that digital assets can facilitate, create additional economic and financial risk, requiring an evolution of regulatory reports to address those risks. So this, out of all of this executive order, that B, this one here, I'm this is kind of one of those things that if you get too much regulatory compliance and red tape, like, it needs to be lean and thin. This is not a paperwork exercise. A lot of this is digital. A lot of this has a digital footprint when it comes to a ledger. So you don't need to compare this apples to apples when it comes to like banking and all that. A lot of different architecture set up here. So I look at this one as kind of like words, but not a huge amount of risk impact. I mean, it's kind of just stating a fact of like some financial stability when people have gotten like rug pulled and stuff, but like there's not a lot of substance in this B here that's really telling us how they're going to go and approach that. So I don't see much activity there than just stating a couple facts that, the space has grown. So really not much action out of B there. C, must mitigate the illicit finance and national security risk posed by the misuse of digital assets. I mean, bottom line, this all, and I've said this for years in this space when it comes to digital assets. There's quite a bit of telemetry in, Bitcoin, in UTXO architectures out there that are not like shielded transactions. And when you look at the liquidity in general, that's provided, or that is the majority of all of the, these larger markets. These are open networks, right? There's open ledgers, the ability to track and trace these type of activities are pretty, I mean, they've been used to knock down some of these large hacks. We saw the $3.5 or $3.6 billion, Bitfinex hack get captured. Bottom line, there's a very limited amount of illicit activity when it comes into the crypto. I think that's been shown over and over and over again because of the track and tracing that comes with this pseudonymous ledgers. And again, like, there are architectures out there and technology stacks that have a limitation when it comes to visibility. If we're talking like XMR, we're talking Zcash, using like Z addresses and stuff. But bottom line, when we're talking the national security risk, misuse of digital assets, illicit finance, terrorism, we're talking big dollars with that kind of stuff, right? This isn't this is stuff that's moving. If it's moving across that network, it's going to be seen and I understand this is one of those things that they have to account for, and it has to be part of that cycle. But it's like looking at all the chips on the table and seeing if this really adds up from the level of potential weight that this could pose out there. Now, if cryptocurrency becomes the financial fabric in the background, then this is where this would really apply more, when you stop having to exchange it for some other kind of fiat currency to pay whatever ends you have. If you had everybody interacting purely on crypto, this is where it becomes more relevant, because then you don't need to have those conversion points. So thereby the addresses would stay technically pseudonymous. But again, you still have that breadcrumbing when you're taking that money and using it in other places, right? So eventually that identity is going to be tied to something, because there is a fabric of all assets out there. Any large assets has a litany of other requirements that are needed there. And at some point it's going to cross an AML, CFT, honeypot. So I think this again is just a reaffirming of the structure that they're looking to do when it comes to, decentralized finance ecosystems. And it's some of that risk that the government's always going to come up with, that if they can't see it, they can't touch it, they can't control it, they're going to be concerned about it. But I think it's up a level from that. And I think that part of the education and part of the other infrastructure when we're talking about it, and this is what I'm talking about. I usually try to explain what I mean by that. Like, if you buy anything anywhere on this planet that has any sort of larger value, what happens? Let's take a walk through this little scenario real quick. Let's say you have some ill-gotten gains of something, right? And then you do whatever you think that you're doing to wash, trade it, whatever. And at some point, you're going to buy something. You're going to buy something that has some other kind of asset system to it. Any kind of procurement of anything has some level of other telemetry to it. If you buy an asset that's a vehicle, a car, a boat, a house, any kind of larger object always has some kind of registration, some kind of tax implementation, pretty much anywhere you go, right? Some are lower taxes, some are higher taxes, some are personal property, some are not personal property. But that asset and that transfer into a name is tying a breadcrumbing of events. It's an event history at the end of the day. And that event history is going to have to reconcile at some point with something based on the way the world's set up with AML CFT right now as it is, right? So to create a whole bunch of additional architecture on top of crypto doesn't make a lot of sense to me right now, more than the existing fabric of the way those things work. It's just a category, right? So if somebody was buying one of those things with ill-gotten gains in some way, be it cash, be it, credit, digital currency, it's just another category, right? So framing it in the way they've done it here is like it's its own thing, and it needs all of this architecture around it and governance and monitoring. I think what's going to happen is they research this further, they're going to realize, like, I look at it as like a Lean Six Sigma exercise, right? I would draw all of the things out on the boxes on a whiteboard and go, do I really need to build all this stuff around this thing? No, not really, because I already have a lot of architecture that's going to supply that information of transfer of assets and ownership that have nothing to do with the median. This is like the phone lines connecting the network, right? It's to create infrastructure around that, I think, is a little more overhead that's required. But we'll see. I mean, this is one of those things that I think they're going to go through, and they're going to identify the obvious, that the infrastructure is already in place. And this is serving it up a lot better than even something like cash to meet those requirements from AML CFT. And I can go further on with like mining, and I saw a comment out there about like, well, you can mine from Coinbase, which not Coinbase the company. Like, if you have a miner, your transfer of earned currency by providing proof of work provides you effectively, quote unquote, new, fresh, clean coins, and then you can go somewhere with those. I mean, that's definitely a possible opportunity there, but still, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're still let's say you have a large mining operation, you earn 100 Bitcoin, every few months, right? I mean, that's a big operation, right? To earn that much crypto, you're going to do reporting and all that from traditionally it looks like a very legitimate business. All that's going well, but that original purchase of all of that mining equipment and stuff's going to be tied back. That whole event from like who's registered of where those miners are at, who's paying the power bill, all that infrastructure stuff still has a lot of telemetry back on it. So again, it's you can transfer it into an asset that gives you that, but I still think that all of the AML CFT would then comply with the assets that you're buying with other capital, right? So it still is a big full circular loop there. It's just where down the rabbit hole is the money coming from. If it's fiat to buy miner equipment, and then that miner equipment's then deployed to then earn currency, which would be then competing with everybody else in the most pure and legitimate way, right? So it's just it would be the same thing of like the same argument. If somebody said that was a bad illicit activity, I would challenge them and say, well, if somebody was being if somebody was using ill-gotten gains to buy a rental property, and then that's the way they were earning passive income, it's the same thing, right? So they're earning legitimate passive income, but the ill-gotten gains is what bought that rental property, right? So that's the same kind of iterative loop that we're talking about. So that asset would be tied to an origination of maybe illicit activity, and then that would be tracked through that method. So let's move on to D here. So reinforce United States leadership in global financial system. This is section D here is probably the one that stuck out the most, because I started reading like there was going to be a lot of regulatory content up front. It was going to sound like possible rulemaking, possible impacts. And then we get to D here, and this is where probably the most bullish piece of it, where there's one thing the U.S. likes to do, and it likes to lead on certain things for sure. And because China shut down back in May of 2021, it indirectly put the United States as one of the leaders in Bitcoin mining by the quick deployment of capital and power systems, mature power systems we have here. And you've seen a massive growth rate here in the U.S. from being a participant. And now the U.S. is one of the leaders when it comes to Bitcoin mining. And having that infrastructure has played, I think, a very pivotal role on this D here, showing that we can be a leader, and we are a leader in the space, especially on the mining side, which then reinforces leadership when you start talking all global financial systems, technology, and economic competitiveness, to where it shows that there's a willingness here to reinforce that leader, being a leader. That reinforce thing, I think, is the one thing I'd highlight and italicize. This is words mean things, and reinforce leadership in there is telling me that there's a positive move forward on trying to maintain that leadership, which means, economic development, payment innovations, digital assets, companies that are Web3, that are building some of this core financial back end, having at least the door open to have those conversations. In addition, this push to ensure that we remain at the forefront of responsible, development. That's going to mean things too. That's going to be developers having, safe harbor here to make sure that, what they're building in code, and is underpinning, the strength of crypto development in general. Is this going to come out as incentive bonuses? Is this going to come out in contracts, in new forms and ways of incentives for companies to come to the U.S. and build stuff? I mean, I'm very interested to see what this comes out and helps build, structurally, And again, this comes back to, like, I've seen a lot of like negative stuff from people in the crypto space today on Twitter. Like, oh man, why do we care that the government's doing this? Like, crypto is supposed to be anti-government. And I look at it like, government exists. We live within a land of laws. Some that we don't like, that we can go and protest and fight about, and try to make sure our representation is that we voted in goes and makes changes to that. If you don't agree with things, and fight for what you believe in, type of stuff, totally for that. But the reality is like, while you'll have your very crypto-centric folks, very pro privacy, which is good. We should have privacy. Somebody should not convince anybody that getting rid of privacy is bad. There's a limitation to what that power should have, for sure. However, there's going to be an entire group of folks that are living day to day that want to participate in this space, that are not going to commit their entire attention to it. And I look, when I see legislation like that, I look at folks, my parents, that type of thing, that want to invest in the space because their kid, focuses on it, but they're not going to spend their day to day on it. And that's something that a lot of very deep crypto folks kind of lose containment on the spatial awareness. It's a lot of tunnel vision, that you need to have the opportunity for people that want to participate in this space, have that opportunity in a very safe way, as safe as possible, and can help finance and participate in it so that it does provide the capital growth that's required for, the developers and people that are super energetic of building out in this space. And you don't really do that without some kind of safety, right? I mean, because people are not going to, they're not going to be self-custodial. I mean, some people are not going to do it, man. Like, I get it, but we got to understand that there's a section of people that are going to be like that, and that's fine. And then there's going to be folks that were relying on having the structure in place to make sure that they're protected. And that's what that means to me, that interoperability, that's what I think that D stands, that the government's going to try to reinforce that position of leadership. And that's a very bullish thing. When I read that, I was like, okay, let's go, boys. Let's get this done. ENF here is really, I think these are kind of like the things they have to say kind of thing, where it's like they're targeting, again, many unbanked Americans. They're using some of the crypto original discussion of what it could bring to people that don't have the ability to go get bank accounts, or have never even attempted it. Cross-border issues when it talks to money transfer, and you look at some of the exploitation of folks that have to use some of those services, like Western Union stuff, that really taxed people on the use of those services. Essentially, they're just bringing that statement. A lot of this whole entire executive order was kind of set up in scope, right? So I was trying to look for the substance, right? I used to use a statement called all style, no substance. This is mostly style with some substance, because it's kind of showing some initiative on what the executive order means. But a lot of this first piece is all set up. So this is, making sure that these functions support these. This comes out of the box. So this whole entire piece right here, yeah, got it. Underserved traditional banking system folks, got it. That came, you had me at hello. That's effectively what crypto has the ability to enable. So that's kind of speaking to the crowd there. Supporting technical advances in promoting responsible development of use of assets. So some of this comes down to environmental impacts. I mean, we folks that track this pretty closely, especially the mining folks, understand and know. It comes back down to ops costs and what's energy use, what's your energy mix. ESG is a hot topic right now. I think everybody's beat this one to death when it comes to having confidence that the trajectory is renewable. The trajectory is a leaner cost. I think that the studies that this one's going to push for is going to help reinforce the realities of that now officially through official sources, and not just a paid media that's paid to attack it type of thing. So I'm looking forward to the output of these activities. And most of these should come off in some capacity to be like RFPs, which is like requests for proposals. I'm going to be looking at the small business and SIBRs, things that are issued out as proposals to kind of track the execution side of this. That's where we kind of get into this, where the coordination, the section 3 is like who's doing it, right? So you guys see kind of the scope above here, and then this is the kind of who's doing it, coordination. So you have a range of different agencies that have been called out here that are going to own some of this. Now, essentially, this was kind of the who's who across the financial sector. And then you have like NIST and a few other standards agencies called out here. But CFTC, FTC, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, there's the OCC, ROC, SEC, pretty much all of the agencies called out here, which we already knew this. This is kind of known of who was going to really do this. The thing that I would say I was expecting here in the coordination is that there would have been an announcement of a new agency that's going to kind of spearhead it, and then just kind of get kind of normal updates from all of these different agencies. But right now it looks like it's still divvied out to the particular agencies. And then this kind of comes into the CBDC. I'm not going to go through this. This is with pretty much the execution strategy that the United States may have potential to support CBDC, and then have a pilot program right here. This is right here with this is the kind of the test. So I look at this as they're going to put together a minimally viable product, so an MVP of see if the central bank digital currency has potential. I mean, they're already showing you right here what they're trying to do with it. Will there be a digital dollar is really what it comes down to. And then within 180 days of this executive order, which obviously that can get kicked down the road, but this is kind of the request for an execution step for them to take a look at CBDCs, and is that going to impact? Is there issues with that? So if I scroll down, that gets down to, again, the actions related to the illicit finances, that stuff that was talked about before, and kind of who owns it. And they're showing the person that owns that within 90 days, Congress, the National Strategy for Combating Terrorists Combating Terrorism and Other Illicit Activities is going to handle that. And essentially, these are the execution orders. Like you got 120 days. So if you're watching content related to this executive order, these are essentially your kind of win. So we talked about the what, we talked about the who. Some of this right here is the how, a limited amount of the how. And then this is the when, right? So the when is within these 90 days, these 120 days. So if you mark the calendars, 3 to 4 months out from right now. So if we're talking, this is March, at April, May, June, July. So we're looking between June and July of some of these things having at least another follow-up. So if you guys are market cycle people and trying to look at what happens here, the question is going to be the execution strategy is 3 to 4 months from now, which will effectively come out with reports. So to give you an idea of the way these things kind of flow, typically, you'll have this kind of executive order that comes out, and this is kind of the kickoff execution-wise to set the orders, right? Say, here's what you're going to look at, here's who's responsible for it, and here's the timeline that I want. So it's the first quote-unquote program increment of the start. So a program increment, 90 days, 120 days. You got 3 to 4 months, they'll come out with a report. So it's they kind of follow a DMEDI type of process. So you got define, measure, explore, which is kind of what they're doing right now. And then you got development and implement, which will come out of actions based on them hitting these dates or not. These dates could slip like anything else. But the point is that now they've set kind of a target on the ground across the spectrum of a few things, right? So when I looked at this, I was looking at, okay, there's 3 to 4 months. What will come out of that? Well, maybe the execution piece of that, when it gets into the development implement piece, the D and the I out of the METI that I was just talking about, that would be maybe RFPs that would drop where their government's going to ask for some support from the industry. Now, there's a good chance that some folks that are out there that are part of industry and government affairs and stuff like that are already working this. It sounded like that was already occurring with some companies. If that's, some of the Bitcoin groups that are out there, foundation that's in DC that handles a lot of this kind of interaction and, fielding questions and answer for them has probably already been interacting, but this will end up going, if any kind of bulk work that has capital deployed to it, meaning like, let's say they put $100 million on vetting out some of these activities, that would come out in some kind of RFP. So we would see a request for proposal out there, or maybe an RFI, which if they need more information coming out of the 90 and 120 days, that would come out as a request for information, which is where they solicit industry and say, hey, we got this thing. We did do some research. You all saw the executive order. Here's some other questions we got. Industry, what do you got for us? Can you help us with it? Can you do whatever? That's a request for information. Then it could switch over to something like a request for proposal. And then that's has a little more meat to it. You usually have to do basis of estimate, level of effort, all that kind of stuff to either enhance or help any of their initiatives here. Bottom line, the whole reason why I'm telling you all this is it's all about timeline. Like, what's this mean? So if there's any action out of this that's going to have a tangible effect on anybody, we're looking at probably 6+ months. This ends up being like an ETH release. And it keeps getting kicked down the road. But that's really kind of the way I look at this. The executive order's out. We saw the what, we saw the when. We're going to learn a lot about the how out of those dates. And then we should have some information for you guys. So hopefully this content was good for you guys, kind of give you guys kind of a background of how the system works on the execution strategy on something like this executive order. Try to give you guys a little different type of content than just reading what you guys could read on how they would go about that, with a little bit of my opinion on some of the statements that were put in there. I'll look and see if there's a few questions, and then we'll wrap this one up for a quick one for you guys. I mean, I'm assuming this would be a good content for you guys. I've watched a couple different folks' videos just to see their opinion on it, and I haven't really heard anybody kind of break down kind of the process or not. But that's essentially it, my dudes. In other news, while you guys are going through some questions here, if anybody didn't see, I had posted a potential impact on Ethereum proof of stake. I'm assuming it's going to move. So Cornell University put out a thing on March 2nd with a proof of stake attack. Now I had it out here under my Twitter. I usually post these things on Twitter here. You can see bottom line, it looks like there's two vulnerabilities. An attack on proof of stake and the greediest, heaviest observe subtree, which is just Ethereum's implementation on proof of stake, has a potential issue with where you could attack it with regards to creating the longest chain with a descending amount of stake. So you could start to reduce the stake and also create all these extra blocks and essentially have this, issue. So I would assume that this is going to slip at least a couple more months until they get that kind of figured out. And we'll see what they can come up with. So anybody that's been tracking proof of stake, bottom line, it looks like it's going to probably slip. Now, this is my opinion of that based on reading that, but that's a pretty significant issue. I can't imagine them trying to move the merge with a bug like that that's been produced. they're going to have to address that. So that was just kind of a little side thing that I let some folks see there. All right. Well, we didn't have any other issues here or any other questions come up, so we're going to wrap this one up. You guys be sure to like, subscribe, and share, and we'll have some good new content coming to you. We have the new studio being built as we speak with the studio portion. We got the service center up and running, but now we're going to be getting the studio together, and we will get you guys